Welcome to EP3. We make energy modeling easy. I'm Karen Walkerman, and today, in this tutorial, we'll create a building using the EP3 wizard. The building we're going to create, and we'll be using the same building for a series of tutorials, is a multifamily residential building that we can see here. In the wizard, we're going to approximate the geometry just by using the width and the depth of the building. And in future tutorials, we'll go through in more detail and show you how to create the custom floor plan and generate all of the windows from the elevations. So I'll start just by measuring this floor plan. So I click T on the keyboard to get my tape measure tool, and I'll measure the width, which is 72 feet. I'm going to hit spacebar to clear that tool, and then T again, and I'll select a new point, and the depth is about 48 feet. Now I'm going to open a new instance of SketchUp, so I'll hit Shift and click on the SketchUp icon that's down in the bottom toolbar. So when the new instance of SketchUp opens, it will open into this welcome screen. And we have the option here whether to open a new model or a recent file. We recommend when you're working with EP3 to always open a new model. And then if you're working with an existing file, once the SketchUp is fully loaded, then you can open your existing file. Today, we're starting a completely new EP3 model. And I'm going to choose the model template to reflect the units that I want to use when I'm modeling. Once you have EP3 open and you're in detailed mode, you can switch back and forth between SI and IP units. But the wizard, when you open the wizard, it will use whichever units you have selected for your model in general. So it's a good idea to choose a model template, a SketchUp template that uses the units you want to use in the wizard. So today I'm going to select a template that uses architectural, so inches, and that way the wizard will open using imperial units. Here we are in SketchUp, and we can see we have our EP3 toolbar up in the right-hand corner. Now, if you don't see the toolbar at the moment, let's close out of it. So your screen may look more like this if this is your first time using EP3. So to view your toolbar, you're going to go to View, Toolbars, and scroll down until you see EP3. And click EP3, and the toolbar will pop up. And you can dock it kind of wherever you want. I like it up in the upper right-hand corner. To get started modeling with EP3, so right now this is just normal SketchUp. To get started modeling with EP3, I'll click on the EP3 logo. And as this is a new file, that's going to get the wizard going. This is the EP3 wizard. So our philosophy in EP3 is that we wanted the normal mode, detailed mode, to be very easy to use and for you to be able to make kind of wide general changes to the model easily in detailed mode. The wizard is here just to help you create a model quickly. So we have various libraries, internal loads, construction, service hot water, HVAC systems. So we're pulling from pre-existing libraries. We ship EP3 with certain libraries, and then we also make it quite easy for you to create your own libraries. We find that most companies will model the same types of buildings or the same types of systems over and over again, and so we make it easy for you to create your own custom libraries for those building types or system types. So let's start with the wizard. So we have a bunch of different tabs, and you can toggle back and forth between them. On the model settings, these are general settings about your model. You can choose your EnergyPlus version. We recommend using the latest version, and generally we release a minor update to EP3 or sometimes a major update to EP3 a week or two behind the EnergyPlus version releases. So we usually stay fairly tightly tied to the newest version of EnergyPlus. We are supporting back to 24.1, and we're committed to supporting every version from 24.1 forward. But let's use 25.1, which is the current latest version of EnergyPlus. We can select units for our output. So this is how the results will be formatted. What units do you want to use for the results formats? So inch pound accept electricity is what you would be used to for if you're in the US and you're used to looking at results in imperial units. So this will give your electricity in kilowatts and kilowatt hours, and it will give your gas systems and your loads in BTUs or therms. If you want your results in international units, SI, you probably want to choose joules to kilowatt hours. EnergyPlus's default units are joules. So if you have nothing selected here, you'll get your results in joules, which most of us are not comfortable working with. We can also select a weather file, and because this is not my first time using EP3, it's taking me directly to this weather file folder on my hard drive, but you may need to navigate to your weather file folder. So I'm going to choose Burlington, Vermont, and click OK. A quick note is that we do expect you to have EnergyPlus installed separately on your computer. So if you don't, at this point, if you don't have any weather files installed, that's fine. You can select a weather file later. And you can also install EnergyPlus later, but EnergyPlus does ship with a couple of default weather files. And then I'll show you in detailed mode, there's also a way to browse and select weather files. We can select a climate zone. So this is here for future use. We have a lead baseline generator that's in development that's not quite complete, but you can select a climate zone here to use with the baseline generator. Run period, I would suggest you leave it alone, but you can do a simulation that's anywhere from a day to multiple, or a day to a year. And I would suggest that you leave the default where we start on January 1st and finish on December 31st. Now you may notice that as I mouse over some of these fields, there are some notes. And if you want some additional information, you can mouse over and find some additional information about these inputs. Okay, so we have our EnergyPlus version, our units, our weather file, and our run period. Now let's take a look at internal loads. So the internal loads, constructions, service hot water, and HVAC systems, the format in the wizard is going to look fairly similar. We have an EP3 library and then a user library. So the user library will only show up after you've started creating your own user library templates. I have some user library templates on this computer for internal loads, not for constructions, but in a later tutorial, we'll show you how to create your own libraries. So let's work with the EP3 libraries. For internal loads, we have broken it down into internal loads that are defined based on space types and then also based on whole building occupancy types. So this will align with your kind of ASHRAE definitions of a space by space type or whole building occupancy type. We do like to work with space by space types, but we've shipped EP3 with a couple more options for whole building occupancy types, and then space by space types. At the moment, we have office buildings and residential buildings. So the building we're working with today is a residential building, and it does have some apartments and some circulation space. So we'll select both. Let's take a look at constructions. So the EP3 library we ship with the ASHRAE 90.1 2022 minimum requirements, and we also have the ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G baseline. So let's grab some constructions for Climate Zone 5 for the 90.1 2022 minimum requirements. And I'm going to take a look at the residential. Now I can click here and get all of the residential constructions. I can also check individual constructions as I like. And with these, you can select as many options as you want. If you wanted to bring in more constructions for different occupancy types, you can choose as many as you like. Under service hot water, let's grab our default water heater. And HVAC systems, I'm going to pull in a fan coil. But we can also, if we wanted to, select other types. And here again, if you mouse over, you can see there's some notes about giving a little bit more detail about what each of these HVAC systems is all about. Under building geometry properties, the EP3 wizard just will give you a rectangular building. It's very, very easy to draw detailed constructions or detailed geometry in the detailed mode, so we don't get into too much detail in the wizard. You have the option to let EP3 draw a rectangular building, or you can say, I want to draw my own building geometry. So we'll say, let it draw a rectangular building for me. So I believe the building was 72 by 48 feet. It's 9 floors, and then I'll have a 9.5 feet floor to floor height. We're not going to model a plenum, and we'll leave the lowest floor at 0 feet. We can specify a north access, and we'll also say 9.5 feet for the roof height above the top floor. So this is quite useful if you had a roof pitch, and say there was like a lower height between the top floor and that attic space, or there's often the top floor there might be a little bit different roof height. And we can select a window to wall ratio. This is given in percent, so right now it's 30%, and a perimeter space depth. So let's change that to 16 feet. And here we can choose a perimeter space type and a core space type. So the perimeter space type will be the apartments, and core space is circulation. You can also add some utility rates. So I'll select USD as a monetary unit, and I don't have information on the water rate, so I'll leave that blank for now. So next step in the wizard, so make sure you have everything selected here that you want, because once you click next, you can't go back in the wizard. So the next step is to modify object inputs. So this gives you the opportunity to modify some of the inputs that were given by the templates you're importing. So internal loads, for example, you have a lighting object, you have people, and here, if we want to adjust some of those inputs, we can do that. So again, we have this broken down into a couple of sections. We have internal loads, we have HVAC, service water heating, and then we also have schedules. So let's take a look at first at internal loads. So remember we had two occupancy types. We had apartments and circulation. And you can see each one of those is showing up here twice because we have a space template and then a zone template. So EnergyPlus and therefore EP3 makes a distinction between spaces and zones. Normally each space, or you can have multiple spaces in a zone. Most models, each zone just has one space. But in some models, you will have multiple spaces for the zone. And the zone defines the HVAC system characteristics, sizing characteristics, and at the space level, you can define internal loads and schedules. So things like your occupancy, your lighting loads, you can specify infiltration, that sort of a thing. So we have it broken down into those categories here. So the space template for apartments, we have lights, and we actually have two different lighting objects in the apartments. We have hardwired lighting, and we also have plug-in lighting. So if you want to, here you can change the lighting power density, and you can do this, of course, in detailed mode as well. We have occupancy, and we have electric equipment, and we have infiltration. And at the zone level, we have our sizing object, and we don't actually have the thermostat exposed in the wizard at this point in time, but we'll take a look at that in detailed mode. Again, with HVAC inputs, we can modify some inputs for the HVAC objects, and you can actually see that EP3 has kind of started building that HVAC system in the background. Let's just take a look and let's adjust the boiler thermal efficiency. Let's make it a 92% efficient boiler. Same format here. And then with schedules, let's take a look. We can modify schedules, or we can look at schedules kind of graphically, and we can also modify them graphically by clicking and dragging these values if you want to change them. To register those changes, we need to click Save Data here. And then when you're set, hit Next. So the last step in the wizard is to select the default constructions. What does that mean? As you're drawing your model, EP3 will assign a construction type to the elements that you're drawing. So floors, ceilings, interior walls, exterior walls, roof construction, fenestration, underground floor, underground walls. So here you can select the constructions that are existing in your model and select them as your sort of default constructions. The wizard does a pretty good job of selecting constructions for you, but you may just want to go in and confirm that these are the constructions that you want. So let's say Finish Wizard, and it will take a minute to kind of finish creating this model for us. And we're going to revisit the screen in a little bit once I introduce you to the EP3 user interface. Okay, but now I'm going to zoom out a bit. Now we have our building. And this opens our building geometry outliner as well. So in EP3, we break the building down into floors. And each floor has interior walls and exterior walls. And you can see as I mouse over each zone or each space, it will show me where that is in 3D geometry. Now we also have roofs for each object. One change from EP3 version 1.1 to version 1.2 is that if we update the building rotation, we actually see that in the building geometry. So if I want to get information about any particular object, I can click on it in the outliner, and I can see that information in my selected object dialog. So with the building, I can change this north axis, and I will see that update in my building here. So if I add some site shading, so let's add some site shading here. I'm going to just use regular SketchUp tools to draw an adjacent building. And maybe there's one over here as well. So let's click on our building here, and we can see that the building rotates and the site shading stays where it is. So in the building geometry outliner, we can see right now we have the building selected, and I'm mousing over as I did before. But if I go all the way down, we now see we have our site shading as well in this building geometry outliner. So let's take a look. So with our building geometry, and I can also hide and unhide things. So I'm going to hide this shading for now so we can really take a look at and concentrate on our building geometry. So in our building geometry, we have 3 floors defined, but with gaps between, and we actually have 9 floors. So how are we making this work? So for each floor, we have information about that floor. We can see we have our defined ceiling height here, and then we have a floor multiplier. And for the bottom floor and the top floor, we don't have anything in the floor multiplier. We can see in our notes that the default is 1. But the middle floor here, we have a floor multiplier of 7. Also, if we go to the intermediate floor roof, let's take a look at our materials here, our constructions. So we'll see we have a whole list of constructions here with a little swatch that shows us what color they are. So we have this adiabatic interior floor and ceiling. So I click this and adjust the color here. We can see that we have both these roofs and the floor. And I'm rotating by clicking the middle button on my mouse. The other thing you can do is hit O on the keyboard for orbit, and that's your orbit tool. Spacebar will get you back to select. So yes, so we can see that we have, if I change this color, it's quite easy to see what construction it is, but the floors and the ceilings between these gaps, these are all defined as adiabatic. So let's go into the middle floor exterior walls. So if I want to enter into any of these objects, I just click this right arrow here. Now we can see that I'm in this context of these exterior walls. We have a shortcut here where you can toggle on and off all the rest of the building geometry. So this is a relatively simple building. You can kind of work with your building geometry while everything is visible, but this lets you, it's especially useful for more complex geometry that you can toggle on and off what's visible. And again, we can also toggle on and off the shading, and you have background floor plans, which we'll get into in the next tutorial, where we can toggle on and off those background floor plans and elevations. So let's look at our surfaces here, and just using the select tool. And again, I'm zooming in and out using the scroll bar on the mouse. So if I select here, I see that I have a surface. So if you've used EnergyPlus in the past, this will look very familiar to you. These are all the same inputs as you might have in EnergyPlus. We're just doing some of the calculations for you. But we have the surface type as a wall. We have the construction name, which is coming from CZ5 residential exterior wall construction. So that actually lines up with this material that is assigned to this wall. I can see the properties of this if I click here. And we can see this is a very simple construction type. We have a metal outside layer, we have some insulation, and then we have gypsum board. There are a couple of custom inputs for constructions. One of them, the most important, is this construction adjacency. So this is where you, as an energy modeler, can select what adjacency are you expecting for any surfaces that are assigned this particular construction type. So an exterior wall construction, we're assigning outdoors. And what that means is that if we have a construction type that is, if we have this construction type assigned to, say, an interior wall, so we can do that real quick. So I have this construction selected here, And now I'm just going to select the SketchUp paint tool. And because I have this construction selected here, I can paint a wall with this tool. So now I have an interior wall that's assigned an exterior construction. And that could potentially cause some issues with us in EnergyPlus. So we have this button right here where we can highlight surfaces that where the expected boundary condition and our calculated boundary condition are not the same. So this is now showing us that we have a surface there that is kind of unexpected. I can go in and I can reassign this construction using the paint bucket tool. So I just got to that by hitting B on the keyboard, B for bucket. And then if I hit Alt, this now modifies that paint bucket into a dropper. So I can select a different construction and paint it. So there we go. And then that highlight is now removed. So if I go into those exterior walls again, I can also get information about a window. So I have my window, and then height and width here, these they can either be calculated based on the size of this window, or you can manually set them as well. For any object in EP3, if you hit IDF, View IDF, it will show you the EnergyPlus code that will be generated for that particular object. So this wall, it's showing up as a building surface detailed. Here are the 3D coordinates, and it's also showing me the coordinates for the window and the information about the window here. So let's take a look. We've looked at our building geometry. We've taken a quick look at constructions. Let's take a look next at our materials that were generated, because the constructions, if we notice, we have some layers here. So those materials need to exist somewhere in the model. There are three main dialogues in EP3. We've taken a look at the selected object dialog. So anything that has a physical representation in EP3, if you have that selected in the SketchUp user interface, information about that object will be displayed in the selected object dialog. We've taken a look at the construction dialog. And lastly, we have this dialog, which is kind of the dialog for everything else. You can see that we have some currency information, we have curves, we have materials, we have some simulation parameters, we have schedules, and then down here we have our space and zone templates, which we'll take a look at in a minute. But first of all, let's look at materials. So we have material, which is a fully defined material, which has thickness, conductivity, density, specific heat. You want to use this for anything that has some sort of thermal mass. There's also material air gap. So these are for those small air spaces in constructions. And then material no mass. This is a very quick way to create a material that just has an R value and maybe a surface roughness. But this is not appropriate for anything like a concrete or a stone, anything with significant thermal mass. So these will show up as layers in your constructions. We also have this, there are multiple ways to describe windows. The templates that we have, we're using the window material simple glazing system. So this basically takes your NFRC rated data. So U factor, solar heat gain coefficient, and visible transmittance. Okay, let's take a look at those space templates and zone templates. So space template, we have residential apartments and residential circulation. Couple things to notice. So we have a bunch of different tabs here. This gives us some information about our ASHRAE space types. So for the future lead baseline generator, these space types will be used by that baseline generator to kind of flesh out the rest of the baseline as it's generated. Each template has obviously a name, and you'll notice that all of the spaces that are listed here that are assigned to this template, they all share the same residential apartments name. And again, with residential circulation, all of the spaces that are on this template share this residential circulation name. Now, if I were to change the name of one of my spaces, so the other thing to notice is that as you click on a space template or on a zone template, those spaces or zones will highlight in the building geometry. And so this can be very, very handy for kind of quickly double checking that you are using that your template is being applied in the ways that you want it to. So let's say that we wanted to make this this space here a circulation space. All I need to do is change the name. So I'm going to copy this name and paste it here using Control C and Control V. So we've done the name change, and let's go back to our whole building. And now if I select residential apartments, residential circulation, you can see that this particular space, because of the name change, is now showing up on this list and is not showing up on the residential apartments list. So by default, your space templates and also your zone templates, the spaces and zones on those lists will be generated based on the names of the template. Now you can change this in model settings. So we go to edit settings. We may have to click it twice. Model settings. Update templates based on, so here we go. We can choose name or a selected template. So if I change to selected template and I refresh this view, we'll see that there are no spaces listed on either list. And when there's no spaces listed, the template will show up in the list in red. So that lets you know that there's an object here, but it's not going to be, nothing is going to be simulated related to this object because there's no spaces on this list. So instead what I need is I need to put spaces manually on that list. So let's get back so we can see this list here. Space template. There we go. And there's two ways to do this. So the most obvious is you go to your selected object dialog and you select a space. And there we go. So we want to make sure we have a space here, and we can select a space template here or here. We can also do that with a little bit quicker. If I go into a floor and then I select some surfaces that correspond with my spaces. So in order to select multiples, I'm using the SketchUp Select tool. So you get that by clicking spacebar. And you can select an individual surface, but as soon as you select a new one, the old is deselected. So to select multiple, select the first one, and then I'll hold Control down, and that gives me the little plus. And if I click one I didn't mean to click, I can hold Shift down to deselect that surface. So once they're selected, I can right click, and you'll see there are a couple of EP3 options here. So the one I want right now is assign a space template, but you can also bulk rename spaces using the same method. So I'll say assign space template, and I can do, do not change, or I can select what I want is to select residential apartments. And then if I go to the residential apartments template, we can see now that I have these 3 spaces on this template. So this gives you more control over how templates are assigned, but it takes a little bit more time and it's a little bit less dynamic. Same thing for the zone template. At the moment, there's no zones on the template, and you would need to go to an individual zone and select your zone template. So by default, we do everything based off of name, and I'm going to switch it back to naming. But if you have a project where you, for some reason, you don't want to do it based on names, your names need to be using a different convention, then you can change to selected template. So this is a global model setting. You can't change it for individual space and zone templates. It's a global setting. So if we go back here and we look at the zone template or the space template, we can see now that, and this is quite easy to see if we look at the whole building. We go to our residential circulation, residential apartments, we can see the highlighting of the spaces and zones included. So under space templates, we have these different tabs. We have lights, people, electric equipment, and infiltration. And to look at all of the inputs, we need to, we might need to scroll across a little bit. So let's go to full screen here so we can see this a little bit better. Now we also have this list here and we can change and we can say allow editing values at the space level. And we can change that to yes. And now under each one of these, if you wanted to update any one of these inputs, either a schedule or power density, you can do that at the individual space level. And so this is something that needs to be changed for each template. I'm going to leave it with the default, and I'm happy with the with just specifying things at the overall template level. Under zone template, we have the sizing object that we looked at briefly in the wizard. So this specifies our design, supply, air temperatures in heating mode and in cooling mode. We can also select the this design specification outdoor air object. This tells us how much outdoor air should be calculated for auto sizing of outdoor air systems. We can do a heating sizing factor and a cooling sizing factor, which actually I would like to add. So let's add a 1.25 heating sizing factor and 1.15 cooling sizing factor. Well, we can double check and maybe do that. Where do we have the sizing factor? There we go, 1.25 and 1.15. Then we also have a thermostat. So this is a simple thermostat, and we can choose a simple or detailed thermostat configuration. We're going to stick with the simple thermostat configuration. And this note here tells us that the simple thermostats require an occupied and unoccupied schedule, and then there's set points for both heating and cooling at occupied and unoccupied conditions. So for residential, the occupancy is sort of, with the circulation, we have the occupancy is sort of always on. So we don't have setbacks in these templates set up at the moment, but you can easily change the schedule. You can select a different schedule or create a new schedule that gives you those setbacks. Let's see, that was actually, I'm sorry, thermostat. Okay, so now we also have some EP3 specific zone HVAC operation parameters. We have an availability schedule for your zone HVAC objects, and then we also have the supply air fan operating mode schedule. So in EnergyPlus, most zone HVAC equipment like heat pumps, fan coils, package terminal air conditioners, they have an availability schedule that says whether this equipment is allowed to attempt to meet a load. And then there's also a schedule that says how the fan operates. So the fan operating schedule, when a value is greater than zero, then the fan is forced on regardless of the load. And when the schedule is zero, it means that the fan is allowed to cycle on and off to meet a load. Um, if your zone HVAC equipment is providing your ventilation air, generally the fan is forced on because that means that that's required in order to provide the ventilation air. If it's a piece of equipment that is just recirculating air and is not providing ventilation air, then often the schedule will be something else. So in this particular case, the equipment is available all the time, and the supply air fan operating mode schedule is always on. We can also specify a design specification outdoor air object. So this can be used by certain types of equipment to provide demand control ventilation. That's a little bit more complex, and we'll get into that in later tutorials. Okay, so let's take a look at our HVAC systems. And we can do that here. So this is a relatively complicated HVAC system. And so far in this tutorial, we've made very, very minor changes, and we're just going through how how things get translated from the wizard into detailed mode. So like the building geometry, under HVAC systems, we have an outliner. And in HVAC, we're organizing things by loop. If you're familiar with EnergyPlus, the EnergyPlus HVAC system architecture is designated by loops. So there are water loops and there are air loops. This particular model doesn't have any air loops, but it has a bunch of water loops. It's probably overly complicated for a residential building, but let's just roll with it for the moment. So we have a couple different loops. We have a hot water loop, chilled water loop, and a condenser water loop. And if I zoom in a bit more, we can see that they're getting highlighted as I mouse over. The loops are broken down into sections. So first we see our set point managers. So those are the objects that we use to set the desired conditions at the output of loops and equipment. And then we have the supply side and demand side, and each of those are broken down into branches. So as you mouse over each one, it highlights. This can be very useful if you're trying to learn the actual EnergyPlus internal architecture. So we can see here we have our boiler, we have a pump. On the chilled water loop, we have our main chiller, and we also have a pump. So let's take a look at some individual inputs. So if we select our boiler, we see that 92% efficiency that we changed in the wizard mode. We can also select objects here and then hit refresh to update our information. This right here, this is our zone HVAC 4-pipe fan coil. And we can also get to that by going here under zone HVAC. So we need to connect the HVAC system here back to our building geometry. So I'm going to get that by clicking this button here, which is View Zone HVAC Assignments. So this should look familiar. This popped up at the end of the wizard as the wizard was completing. We'll notice we have our group, our residential apartments and our residential circulation. And then there's another tab here to assign HVAC systems by zone. So here we have assign HVAC systems by group, and assign HVAC systems by zone. This takes a second to load the first time when you switch. And we'll see in both tabs, we just have this fan coil as our option. So if I assign the fan coil to residential apartments, this will again take a second to update. All of our apartments are now assigned that fan coil. And I can override these inputs. I could click this on and off on individual apartments if I wanted to. It is important for EnergyPlus that every zone that's listed here is assigned at least one zone HVAC system. Otherwise, you'll have an EnergyPlus error. So let's go back and let's actually assign the fan coil as well to circulation. Once we do that, if I refresh this zone HVAC 4-pipe fan coil, we can see that underneath this fan coil, we have replicated objects for the zone HVAC 4-pipe fan coil. And we have listed each individual zone here. So residential apartments, zone 1, zone 2, etc. The inputs up here, the background is white. And down here, we have this reddish background. Anytime you see a reddish background, it means that the input is inherited from somewhere else in the model. So if we change a value up here, so let's change this low speed supply airflow ratio to 0.5, and then we may need to refresh. And I'll scroll down, you'll see we have 0.5 here. I can change this value for any individual object, and then the background color changes. And that's just a context clue that tells you that this is the particular place in the model where this value is stored. One thing you may notice is that up here, the availability schedule name is blank, but here it's an inherited value. So that is being inherited from our zone template. So to give you a demonstration, let's change the supplier fan operating mode for our circulation to always off. So essentially, we're not providing ventilation all the time for those corridors. Now let's refresh our view. And we'll scroll down. And let's find the input for our supply airphone operating mode schedule name. And we see we have, for residential apartments, we have always on. But once we come to a circulation zone, the schedule is always off. Now, the 4-pipe fan coil includes a couple of sub-components. So let's just collapse this. We have an outdoor air mixer, which doesn't actually have any variables that you can change, but this is how outdoor air mixer is something you'll see over and over again in EnergyPlus, and that allows you to mix outdoor air into an airflow. And there's a fan. There's a cooling coil, and there's a heating coil. Now, these objects have some very generic names. If you click this button here, change subcomponent names, it will rename those objects to a name where it says fan coil, and then whatever it is. So it's fan coil OA mixer, fan coil fan coil cooling coil, fan coil heating coil. So that just makes it a little bit easier to recognize these objects if you're working directly with EnergyPlus. Okay, so we've looked at our building geometry, we've looked at our internal loads, we've inspected our HVAC systems. Let's run a simulation. Before we do that, I'm just going to quickly hit save. And then to run the simulation, we click this button here, which is simulate/export. And this will ask me to confirm the outside boundary conditions for our constructions. And I'm just going to inspect and then hit OK. This will only ask you to do that once the first time you simulate the model. So now I can I'm going to select that I want to simulate the global model, and then I'm going to say simulate. So for simulation, you can generate a new EnergyPlus file and simulate that. You can just generate the IDF file, so export only, or you can simulate existing EnergyPlus files. But let's simulate a new file, and I'm going to choose a location. And if I just leave the file name as this underscore, it will give me a default file name. So I'll just click save. And I'll hit OK to start export. So now it's giving me a little update report as to what it's doing. We have an export report, which is generated when EP3 translates the EP3 model into an EnergyPlus model. And also we can see that the EnergyPlus simulation is running here in the background. So while the simulation is running, you're free to interact with your model. So I'll just say this about the export report is that if you have any EnergyPlus level errors, in order to resolve them, first check here. And we'll go over some of what these warnings and errors are in future tutorials when we look at more detailed systems. Okay, so the simulation is complete, and this will automatically open up the results viewer for us. EnergyPlus has a ton of information available for your EnergyPlus model. We've pre-selected some of the most commonly used results tables and elected to display them for you. So there's a general input and verification summary, which tells you how many hours your simulation ran, the location and latitude and longitude, north axis, etc. The annual building utility performance summary. This is your overview of the energy used in the building. So here we have electricity in kilowatt hours, natural gas in kilobtu's, and water usage. And there's some lead summary reports. Any of these you can also click to export to a CSV or view a bar graph. When you have multiple efficiency measures, those will show up here, and it's a very nice comparison between different efficiency level measures. You also have access to additional reports, clicking select reports to display, and then we could take a look and choose any number of available EnergyPlus reports. This concludes our tutorial on using EP3 to create a building using the wizard. In future tutorials, we'll review efficiency measures, detailed building geometry, detailed HVAC systems, and other more advanced topics.